to this bi-weekly webinar of the Team Society. So just to remind you first, Team Society is then a platform which is organized under NTNU Energy, and it seeks to bring together and promote social science and humanities oriented scholarship on energy and climate issues across NTNU, and to showcase kind of various activities within that domain. And one of our activities is this webinar series that we have every other week, where we have speakers from different departments. And today we are very lucky to have from the Department of Psychology, Institute of Psychology, Michalina Marczak, who will be talking about emotions and climate change. And when she is finished, we will also have some comments to this work by Marianne Ryghaug from the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies of Culture. Before we open for discussion among everyone in the room. So welcome, Michalina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and hello everyone, and welcome to this presentation about emotions in the context of climate change, and more specifically how climate change makes us feel and what it means for our mental health and climate action taking. Just to give you a short outline of what I will be speaking about, I will give you a short introduction about emotions. I will then link climate change with emotions, health, and behavior. After that, I will tell you about the link between emotions and pro-environmental behavior in general. I will introduce climate change as a unique stressor for mental health, and I will tell you about the problem with how we understand climate anxiety, and then I will move on to my own research on that topic. Emotions are central to human experience. They affect a number of processes, such as cognitive processes, memory, attention, perception, learning, reasoning, decision-making, as well as motivation, social relations, values and morality, behavior and health. And you may ask at that point, what are emotions actually? Well, there is no scientific consensus on a definition of emotions. Traditionally, theories of emotion assume that emotions are discrete, not learned, and are produced by dedicated circuits in the brain, for example, an anger circuit or a fear circuit. But most recent evidence suggests that emotions are not biologically hardwired, but instead emerge in consciousness in the moment from more fundamental ingredients. And in my work, I have assumed a working definition of emotions. I have defined them as biological states associated with the nervous system, brought on by neurophysiological changes associated with thoughts, feelings, behavioral responses, and a degree of pleasure and displeasure. And I think it is relevant at that point to ask about the function of emotions. And one of the central functions of emotions is that they signify needs and facilitate adaptive responses to challenges. They mediate between continually changing situations and an individual's behavior. In that sense, emotions are central also to the experience of climate change. While climate change can influence our health directly, for example, during acute extreme weather events, mental health in the context of climate change is affected through emotions, through how we feel about climate change. And we have a reason to believe that also how we behave in the context of climate change, including our pro-environmental behaviors, this is also mediated by how we feel about climate change. I hope that this graph that I made illustrates the links between climate change, emotions, health, and behavior. Classical work on emotions asserts that distinct emotions are related with behavioral tendencies that they evoke. For example, sadness is related to helplessness behavior and distancing. Fear is related to avoidance approach behavior. Anger is related to behaviors such as action against something that causes anger. But the problem with these classical action tendencies of emotions is that we most likely are not supposed to speak about the discrete emotions, because it's much more complex in reality. Nevertheless, there have been some experiments, especially in the field of climate change communication, and in these experiments, certain messages were supposed to evoke certain emotions, and it was measured how they relate to people's pro-environmental behavior. And for example, inducing fear and sadness was showed to be effective in encouraging pro-environmental behavior. Other experiments showed that more positive, for example, hope-evoking messages were more effective. Although, yeah, these experiments, as I said, they come from the field of climate change communication, so they're mostly concentrated on certain communicates or narratives about climate change, and how more general contextualized feelings we have about climate change and how they relate to how we behave in the context of climate change. This has not been studied so extensively. Going back to the topic of climate change, it can be seen as a unique stressor for mental health. And it can affect mental health in a number of ways. For example, acute extreme weather events such as hurricanes, they can cause trauma, PTSD, depression, anxiety disorders. They can be either acute or chronic conditions. Subacute long-term events such as heat waves, they influence multiple aspects of mental health. There's increased psychiatric morbidity during heat waves, for example, and the increased temperature was also showed to lead to malfunctioning of psychiatric medications. Suicide rates increase also during heat waves. Then there's this whole umbrella of slowly unfolding long-lasting events such as mass migration, water and food shortages, and their influence on mental health has been studied to some extent as well, although it has not been linked so well to climate change, but these events are also related to climate change. And then there is this last box, the box I'm the most interested in, which is the awareness and anticipation of the consequences of climate change. And it seems that just the awareness of climate change might be a source of stress. And this is a relatively new observation. Many people in the world are affected so far by indirect and virtual social representations of climate change. Nevertheless, this indirect impact of the climate crisis does not diminish some people's strong emotional reactions to climate change. And some people seem to respond to the awareness of climate change in psychologically troubling ways. Terms such as climate depression and climate anxiety have entered public discourse. However, there is little conceptual clarity over what they actually mean, whether they should be understood in colloquial terms as some degree of sadness or some degree of nervousness about climate change, or whether they are in fact related to psychopathology. And some work on that topic has been conducted recently, for example, by the mother of climate change psychology, Susan Clayton. She has published a paper in May in which she has developed a measure of climate change anxiety, but she has assumed that there must be something true in how people speak about what they feel about climate change, or not really people, but more media. And she assumed that there's something like climate anxiety must exist. And she just filled her measure of climate anxiety with questions that measure anxiety in relation to climate change. And she has found indeed that it makes some sense. And in her sample of people registered in an online research platform, nearly a quarter has experienced some degree of functional impairment because of how they feel about climate change. But we know at the same time that research prior to Susan Clayton's study, research showed that the negative emotional experience of the awareness of climate change is certainly not limited to anxiety. People in Europe, Canada, and in the US associated climate change with the feelings of fear, loss, frustration, grief, and despair, documenting that the emotional perception of climate change is broader than anxiety. These studies, however, were rather shallow, and they did not inspect the more detailed context of experiencing these feelings, how often they occur, with what intensity, and how these emotions affected people's lives. Hence my project. The draft title of my PhD project is Emotional Aspects of Climate Change Concern and Their Relation to Personality, Mental Health, and Climate Action Taking. This project is a project funded by my own project, funded by NTNU, and it is inspired by my own environmental engagement, by my previous work on emotional connectedness to nature, and also by the work of Ashley Consolo in the Canadian Arctic, and by Glenn Albrecht in Australia. And in this project, I'm planning to systematically approach and explore the range of emotions related to climate change concern and the complex links between emotions, personality, psychosocial well-being, and behavior in the context of climate change. And I underlined the word complex, because I'm really inspired by the complexity theory, and I would like to implement it in how I view my results and in how I plan my studies. So I have conducted 2 studies out of 4 that I have planned for this project. I have conducted a qualitative study, an exploratory qualitative study that I will tell you about, and I have conducted a meta-analysis on the role of personality in environmental engagement. I'm working now on analyzing and describing both of these studies. And I'm also planning to develop a more detailed multidimensional measure of climate change distress, and implement this measure in a large-scale populational study. I have also initiated cooperation with an institution in Poland where I used to work, and we have applied for funding from the EEA grants. We have received quite a large grant, and now this project is expanded and will contain more levels of analysis, a cross-cultural approach, and experimental and neuroimaging studies. And there's actually quite a large team of people working on that topic now in Poland. Yeah, the current study. I want to tell you today about my most recent study, which has a draft title, The Emotional Burden of Climate Change Concern, an exploratory study in Norway. And the aim of this study was to explore the emotions behind people's concern about climate change and describe how these emotions relate to psychosocial functioning and climate action taking. And unlike Susan Clayton, who adopted this top-down approach, where she assumed that something like climate anxiety exists and it's related to anxiety, I decided to adopt a bottom-up approach. I decided to talk to people about how they feel about climate change, in what situations, with what intensity, and how it influences their lives. And based on these interviews, I would like to construct a measure, a more multidimensional and the raw measure of climate change distress. I have conducted 33 semi-structured, in-depth interviews. I included an intentional sample of adult people who were worried about climate change and felt that this worry influenced their lives. And I strived to reach, and I think I reached quite a diverse sample of people in terms of gender, age, occupation, residence, or urban versus rural, and environmental engagement, actually, or engagement in environmental organizations. I have ended up with 35 hours of recordings, which were transcribed verbatim with an extra focus on emotions. And we have conducted a rigorous multi-step qualitative content analysis in cooperation with 2 other coders. All the interviews were coded at least two times. Most of them were coded 3 times, and it was a multi-step process, as I said. And I'm also planning to conduct some other analysis, but this is work in progress. So today I'm only going to talk about the results of the qualitative content analysis. What each of my interviewees felt in relation to climate change was a complex cocktail of mostly negative emotions. And this word cloud is not a publication quality word cloud yet, but I think it illustrates the emotions that were the most common in my interviewees. And people were very aware that it was both a very complex topic and that their feelings about it were very complicated. And now I just want to give you a warning that there's going to be way too many words on the next slides, because I had quite the problem how to present the results of this qualitative content analysis. It's quite a challenge already writing about it and putting it in a concise way in the paper, and not to even mention presenting it in a PowerPoint presentation. I decided to squeeze my results, and I came up with keywords that would describe the results in each category. So the emotion that was mentioned first and foremost by my interviewees was sadness, and people experienced it in quite an intense way. They spoke about feeling grief, deep sorrow, emotional pain. Many had tears in their eyes or cried during the interviews. Many people told me that they were also tearful in everyday life when reading about climate change or when seeing changes in the natural environment around them. Many people told me that they were depressed about climate change, and these strong emotions were related to the feeling of loss of nature, species, habitats, landscape, but also loss of opportunities for human and non-human beings, especially for the future generations. These feelings were also related to the unfairness of climate change, that people and other beings who contributed to it the least will have to bear the biggest consequences. People were sad about the violence that human societies inflict upon nature. They were sad because of the powerlessness. They were very sad upon personal experience of change in the environment, especially the environments that they were close, that they had close bonds with. And the colors of climate change were gloominess and darkness. Many people also felt disappointed and disillusioned about what's happening, disappointed by the indifference of people in power and by the lack of concern in the general society, and disillusioned about the ability of human societies to address climate change. And I have a quotation for you. When speaking about disappointment and disillusionment, the interviewees would often turn into anger. For example, I'm very disappointed in how we and how the government in Norway, especially in Norway, because that's where I live, that's the closest, but in other countries as well, how is it possible to prioritize like this? And I'm disappointed when I read about how they prioritize money. Well, yeah, anger was the second emotion that was referred to most often, and people would have many things to tell me about their anger. Every person I spoke to felt some degree of annoyance, irritation, and especially frustration. Many people felt rage and fury, as well as disgust, especially towards people in power. The leaders, corporations, the ultra-rich, while annoyance and irritation were reserved to the general society, as well as friends and family. Young people were angry at older people for depriving them of having an optimistic view for the future, for stealing their future, but also for down-talking and saying that everything will be all right, that they're exaggerating. Many people were angry at the humankind and human nature in general that is so damaging. People were also angry at our culture or system that is so damaging. People were frustrated at the slow pace of changes. They were angry either at the ignorance of the general society and the ignorance of the leaders, or they were angry that people, especially the ultra-rich and corporations, are doing all these damaging things, knowing exactly where this is leading. The violence inflicted upon nature was another source of anger. People were angry that they have no future, or that their children or grandchildren will have no future. New polluting investments that would cause rage or very strong anger in my interviewees, and powerlessness was also a source of anger. I need to turn it up for a moment to move this. Yeah, sorry. When it comes to fear, this was something that was mentioned by most of the interviewees, but the people could not really tell me what they are afraid of really, or many people would tell me that they know that they should be scared. They had a very good knowledge about what might happen, and this is another thing I might be working on later on. I want to take a mental models approach to how people view the threats of climate change. But so yeah, my interviewees had very good knowledge about the potential threats of climate change, but many people said something like, well, I know I should be scared, but I cannot feel it in the body. So it was more of an apprehension and some degree of nervousness. Although some people would say that there were many times that they realized the terror and that they could feel it in the body, the terror and anxiety. Nevertheless, people were scared about the uncertainty of the future. They would view their future in very apocalyptic terms. Young people were afraid about starting a family, and many people spoke about the moment they took in all the knowledge and realized this is not something abstract, something that will happen to somebody else far away in the future, but this is a real thing that they might be affected. So upon realizing their own vulnerability, that's the moment when they felt terror, and that's the moment after which they had some degree of anxiety for some time before they came up with some strategies to fight it. Yes, and again, upon personal experience of the changes in their natural, in the natural environment around them, many people also felt fear and terror. And interestingly, I also spoke to people who work within environmental sciences, and many scientists told me that they felt anxious and uncomfortable while reading journal articles about what's happening to the environment. I think these three emotions on that slide are also very definitional of this climate change distress. People had a lot of guilt. I think, again, most of the interviewees mentioned that they feel guilty when they perform some behaviors that are considered not environmentally friendly. People felt very guilty while when they thought that they're not doing enough, including and not reading about climate change. Some people would decide to distance themselves for a moment from reading because it was causing so much sadness or nervousness, but then they would feel guilty that they're distancing themselves. People felt guilty being a part of consumer society. People were guilty about their own privilege. I think I have a good quotation here. Yeah. No. Yeah, I can also feel very guilty, because if I feel like I'm not doing enough, and that might be my way of living, that causes some bad things to happen. Because I am a lucky rich girl living in Norway, and just my way of living is not sustainable. Even though I'm trying my best to do what I can, but even just living in this rich country, yeah, so that's also something that I can feel guilty about, especially for not having done enough before. People felt guilty also about not having the courage to break in from the damaging system, for not having courage to speak up, for worrying about other things, because they were convinced that the main thing we should be worried about is climate change, but they were worrying about losing weight, for example, and it led to strong feelings of guilt. Interestingly, many people spoke about feeling guilty when weather was nice, when they knew or when they were convinced that it should not be nice. For example, a warm autumn. And many people spoke about having a personal responsibility for climate action, and they were aware of the irrationality of this guilt. They were aware that individual actions are not decisive, but still they could not shake off these feelings of guilt. And this guilt would lead to strong anxiety. Isolation, feelings of isolation is another interesting topic. People felt excluded from the society who did not understand the threat of climate change. They were torn between their own values and being part of a sick society. They felt a lot of irritation, annoyance, and anger towards people around them, including friends and family. It would put a strain on their relationships with other people. They were met with negative reactions from others. They were often put down by other people. Many people would put on a non-confronting mask, and they would act as if nothing was happening. They would pretend that they're interested that somebody went on holiday or that somebody was getting married, while inside they were screaming, "Come on, the world is collapsing. Why are you doing that?" While especially older people, they spoke about becoming more cynical about climate change, and when talking to people who were not interested in that topic, people felt also betrayed by the people in power, by authorities, and they were distrustful towards the institutions because of that. And also existential loneliness was something mentioned very often. This existential loneliness of being all alone in this world that is passing away and dying. Hopelessness was related to strong pessimism, powerlessness, confusion, uncertainty about the future, despair. People would speak about the future using terms such as societal collapse, serious breakdown, the end of, we are living at the end of time, we're inevitably slipping off a cliff, there is no future. It was at times taking away from their enjoyment of life. Many people were convinced that there is no point to having a family. Many people felt resigned. They accepted that there's nothing that we can really do, but it did not stop them from having a strong personal obligation to be engaged in climate action. And many people were also striving to enjoy life even more. Many people said that they were striving to enjoy life even more because they knew that we're nearing a collapse. So now we have the last time to enjoy life. And I'm going to speak very briefly about these three emotions here. People felt powerless. They felt that climate change is an unsolvable issue, that it is beyond human capabilities, that one person cannot do much about it. They felt that their actions are meaningless, but they were still very obliged to act upon climate change. People were confused about what is an impactful action, confused about what they should be doing. They were aware that systemic changes are needed, or they were desperate for systemic changes to be introduced. People spoke about failing to fulfill basic social roles. And I have a very interesting quote here from a father. I do not have anything to teach my children. I also feel a bit paralyzed because I somehow can't acquire that kind of knowledge, neither to grow food or build things or defend myself or whatever it takes. Again, this notion of being betrayed by the leaders was also mentioned when people spoke about their powerlessness, and people also felt being trapped in the system that is so damaging. People were confused about what to believe in, what to do. They had lack of certainty about what is going to happen. They were questioning the narrative of progress, and many people spoke about that the old ways of knowing, maybe the old rules might no longer be true in the future. And this was confusion was something that was mentioned especially by young people, by the generation Z and millennials. People also had some positive emotions when it comes to climate change. People were extremely interested by this topic. They had a strong motivation to act. Many people had acceptance about what is happening, or they learned to accept it, and it in a way freed them from anxiety. Many people spoke about learning to appreciate life on another level and finding meaning in the struggle, and not only in the struggle but also knowing that everything might collapse. It made them realize what's important and taught them to prioritize things. Many people spoke about it. People were also desperate for hope. They would be, upon reading some positive, relatively positive news about somebody cleaning a beach in Mumbai, they would cry and be happy for some time and think that the situation can really change. But many people were also disillusioned by the concept of hope. And collective climate action would bring many positive feelings to people. Thankfulness, many people were invigorated by collective climate action and inspired by it. And these emotions would affect people's psychological and psychosocial well-being. It would lead to cyclically lowered mood, at times decreased enjoyment of life. This shadow of climate change was always in the back of people's heads. Many people spoke about it. Some people would have ruminations at times, which means intrusive negative thoughts that were difficult to control about climate change. This worry affected their motivation to engage in different activities. Many people had this "what's the point" attitude about engaging in different things and planning for the future. It felt overwhelming on a regular basis. It could disturb concentration at times. For many people, it was difficult to control at times again. It affected relationships with other people on a regular basis, and it could also influence people's appetite. Many people spoke that they would rather not eat something than eat this thing and feel guilty about eating meat, for example. Some people were considering or were implementing an idea of reducing their calorie intake to reduce their carbon footprint. And when it comes to climate action, all of the people I spoke with were involved in long-term, high cost and high impact behaviors. People had this sort of lens of climate change through which they would judge their behaviors and choices and strive to choose things that were positive or that did not have such an impact on the environment, but it was not any sacrifice to behave that way. People internalized and habitualized this low impact lifestyle. They were proud about it. It became part of their identity. They were striving to live up to their quite high standards. And when they couldn't, that would lead to these strong feelings of guilt. So people maybe were more motivated by avoiding guilt than by this so-called warm glow, a boost of positive emotions upon behaving environmentally. Unfortunately, some people would be fixated on things of little importance, such as plastic bags, and when they were forced to use a plastic bag, they would think about it all the time and feel guilty. Or when they couldn't sort the garbage, that would also lead to guilt and thinking about it. And also many people were taking climate change into consideration when planning for the future and learning skills that would be needed probably in the future. But I think the most interesting thing is that it's not, I can't speak of any causal relationships, and I think it's much more complicated. The only thing I can say now is that all the people that I spoke with who experienced these strong emotions, they were also involved in high impact behaviors that required some personal sacrifices, such as being on a plant-based diet, ditching flying, ditching having a car, being involved in collective climate action, voting for green policies that would likely include some personal costs. So just to conclude, people who were concerned about climate change in my study, it's definitely not all the people that are concerned about climate change, but at least some people that are concerned about climate change carry this heavy emotional burden of climate change concern related to strong feelings of sadness, anger, fear, isolation, guilt, powerlessness, hope, and hopelessness. And the question, I think an interesting question, is whether it is possible to leverage this emotional engagement while limiting the emotional burden. And I think that it touches upon the issue of the individualization of responsibility for climate change. And this is something I would want to discuss in my paper that I have started writing recently. Thank you for your attention.
Great, thanks a lot. I thought that was really interesting. Lots of things to discuss. Free to use the applause function, as some people are already doing. We have some prepared comments, I think, from Marianne Ryghaug. So go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me? Thank you for a very exciting talk about a quite depressing topic. I think it's seems like a really nice project to look more into the emotional responses to climate change, particularly since it's been so much focus on the more rational side of climate change and how to understand the climate change problem. I think that's a really nice avenue for research. So thanks again for a really great presentation. My comment comes from another field. I'm not a psychologist, so I'm doing science and technology studies, and so I thought I would comment from that ground. And also I've been doing research myself in public understanding of the climate change problem previously. But this research dates almost 15 years back, at least some of it. But it was really interesting to see that there are still so many commonalities to what you find. But first to comment a little bit on that, if you look at the public understanding of science literature, one of the fields that have been really into this topic, how do we understand the science and the climate change problem, we can see that there has been clearly a focus on the knowledge component of the climate change problem. And for many years it was looked at from a knowledge deficit kind of framing. So people were perceived as not having enough knowledge about problems. And the whole idea about how to communicate it was about how can we transfer this knowledge to people more effectively. And I also think it's nice to then remind us about the political discourse around this in Norway, at least. Around, I think it was around 2005, we had this person called Jørgen Randers. He's a quite famous figure in the climate policy field in Norway, and he was leader of this Lavutslippsutvalget. And one of his, he was against this whole rational framing of the climate change problem, and he said exactly that we should scare people more. People are not afraid enough, and well, maybe he has succeeded from what you have been telling today. At least some people have been quite scared from this. But from our perspective, we did this from a bit of another approach. We have used this domestication approach when we have tried to understand how people appropriate climate change knowledge and the problem. And but we found many of the same things that you did, like the individualization of the problem, the powerlessness that people find, and for instance, that it's individualized and it's not the political bodies who take responsibility to the problem. And I think this relates to how the problem is framed. So that was one of my questions to you. If you could say a little bit more about what you think about the framing of the problem and how that relates to how people perceive it, if it's threatening enough or not.
Yeah, I think there are so many different audiences that have access to different information, really. So I was speaking to this probably small part of society that is super interested in that topic, that is also closed in the social media bubble, where they mostly get this negative narrative about it. And of course, it's difficult to get any other narrative about it, really, when you're interested in it. And they also had a lot of knowledge about climate change. People were citing IPCC reports, or at least how media discussed these reports. As I said, I spoke with some environmental scientists who had professional knowledge that made them so scared. So I think it's really difficult to talk about one general framing of the climate change problem now, when we have so many different bubbles where people are closed in, and different information that gets to them. And I think it's also something that Per Espen Stoknes spoke about or discussed in his book, What We Think About When We Don't Think About Climate Change, that, many people protect themselves from understanding this knowledge. And that's also related to emotions, that upon realizing that one's own vulnerability in this, all the vulnerability of their children or grandchildren, it's really fearful. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I also thought about some recommendations for climate change communication based on my paper. And maybe I think that people should be scared. I agree with this Jürgen, I don't remember his name, last name, that maybe this is something that we should strive for, that people should take it in. And this is something we should be discussing in terms of real existential threat, but then discourse should open to discussing how to avoid all these long-term negative feelings and these psychosocial impacts, the feelings of guilt, isolation, and maybe even leading to psychopathology. So, yeah.
I have one more question to you. Coming from a more kind of critical, interpretive public understanding tradition, studying the relationship between science and the public, not as a kind of abstract relationship, I think, as you are doing as well, but as something that is very locally situated. Have you thought a bit about that? And how could you look for variation within your data? I guess most of your NTs are from Norway, right?
Yeah, they're all from Norway. And what I was trying to explore was this range of emotional reactions that I discovered were pretty similar, although I intended to have a diverse sample of people. So I made a decision tree, and upon including people to my study, and I divided people into generational cohorts. I wanted to speak to a certain number of Generation Z, millennials, Generation X, and boomers. I wanted to speak to people of different genders, as I said, of different occupations, of residing in urban and rural areas and in small towns. So yeah, I hope to speak to different people, and also people of different educational background. I also spoke to people who did not have a university degree, and it was quite surprising to see, like, on this level of analysis, qualitative content analysis, it's really difficult to draw like strong conclusions about the correlations between like age and level of education and what people feel. But still, I think that how people reacted was very similar, if that answers your question.
Yeah. Another question is relating to how people perceive the problem and the room for action or their own abilities to act on it. I guess you have been touched upon that a little bit, but that also has to do with a more contextual situation and how you perceive if policymakers are doing enough or not, or if airplane tickets cost 10 euros, that's also giving a signal.
People were so frustrated. Everybody was so frustrated about the need for systemic changes, and that's why they felt so powerless and so isolated and betrayed by the leaders and people in power, that they were doing so much, they were feeling so much guilt, but they felt isolated in what they were trying to do. So I think, again, everyone spoke about frustration with the pace of changes and anger at the people in power, that they actually have the power to change something, but they're doing so little. Maybe, I think it would be interesting to also maybe compare what people think about the pace of changes and how little is being done by the leaders with what actually is being implemented, because this was some sort of bipolar thinking, that people were like, no, leaders, they can never do anything right, they betrayed us, there is no action whatsoever. But there is some action, right? We have Green New Deal, and there are some changes being implemented, but people I spoke to, they saw it in very black and white terms. Yeah,
I see there are more questions, so I will take more of the time. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you both. So we have a lot of people who want in on this discussion. So we'll open it up. Please use the raise hand or chat function. And we have already Howard, Stig, and Gisle in the chat. So Howard?
Yes, thank you, Thomas. And thank you, of course, Michalina, for your very rich account, empirically rich account of how emotions worked in relation to climate change. I would invite you to tell a bit more about how complexity functions in your work, because I myself have a bit of a love-hate relationship with complexity. On the one hand, I am, of course, fascinated by the sum being more than the sum of parts. Which is, in my view, how complexity works. At the same time, it doesn't explain a lot, and it's also itself not an object that is very suitable for explanation itself. So I was wondering how it sits in your theoretical framework and how you go about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. I have really discovered complexity theory upon starting this project, and I became increasingly more interested in that approach, also because I was frustrated with the work I've done before, that it was so fragmental and not taking into account the larger systems. In that way, I would like, at least, I don't know if it will be possible for me to include complexity theory in the methods I will adopt, although there are, I'm thinking about, for example, with this study, I have hundreds of pages of transcripts, and I thought of exploring the topic of qualitative network analysis. I think it's possible, and it's also a tool used in complexity approaches to qualitative data. But what I was thinking about was discussing my results and the implications of my work, but also the rationale for my work in terms of how of different systems it pertains to, and how different systems lead to the phenomena I'm researching, and how different systems would be affected by it. So that's my approach to complexity science for now. But this is something I'm still exploring.
Okay, thank you.
Then we have Stig Larsäter. If he's still on the call and not muted. He is muted. Can I unmute him, perhaps? I cannot.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm on a low quality line, so I cannot use my video. Sorry for that. Thanks again for a really interesting presentation. I have a background in environmental psychology. I did my master's thesis here, and then I betrayed psychology and went to the STS field. But I have some more psychology related questions, and then some more general comments. So first, I used a very conventional theory of reasoned behavior and general attitudes, specific attitudes, and behavioral dispositions, and this theory has sort of sieved out to the general society to a large extent. So this idea of doing attitudes, influencing attitudes, and then implicitly influencing people's behavior, it's sort of really prominent in many policy debates, while the issue of emotions are quite, I would say, absent, at least in a policy setting. And you yourself, you didn't mention the concept of attitudes once, I think. Mm-hmm. And it's quite interesting for me to observe that there seemed to be this kind of disparate discursive field within this area, that you focus on emotions and you don't mention the concept of attitudes at all, which it is not a critique, but I just observe it as an interesting fact. Regarding this idea of scaring people more, there's this really interesting life story of one friend of mine. She's called Mari Ese, and she has been the leader of the Future in Our Hands. This is a local NGO here, and she has been sort of a really prominent NGO advocate for dramatic change in society and so on. And she changed her sort of life narrative quite recently, and she decided that the world cannot be saved, and she have written quite a lot of articles about it, and now she's engaged. It's a Facebook group called Deep Adaptation. I think it's an international wave as well, that it's not prepping, but it's related to the prepping movement, but it's a kind of a deep recognition that this system will not save itself, so we need to build something else from the bottom up. And and that's an interesting phenomena, because I think one very important concept here is the self-efficacy concept. So people's perceived influence over their lives. And I think if you scare people a lot and they have a low self-efficacy or perceived degrees of freedom to influence their faith, you might expect more psychopathology to follow, I guess. So I think we need to sort of, when we discuss the possible implications of your research, we need to have sort of this kind of choice architecture picture in mind, in my view at least, if we are talking about policy recommendation, that is. And the final point I want to make is the role of media. And when we look at how the situation in the US is playing out now, we see that even more than social media, we have also sort of the mainstream media that creates or supports kind of a really separate worlds, and people use separate media channels to sustain their dominant narratives, and it seems to be no bridge between them. And I see this as a big structural problem, really, if we are going to have large-scale transitions in society towards a greener future. It's extremely complicated when you have this fragmentation in life worlds, and I don't have any good solutions, and I wonder if you have something to add on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the conclusions that I had after analyzing my data was that it needs to be communicated clearly what actions have impact and what individual actions are important. I'm not downsizing individual behavior, but a lot of people felt so guilty about their own individual behaviors. And I think it's important to communicate what really matters and what doesn't matter that much, and it needs to be communicated. The impact, what needs to be communicated is the impact that behavior has, and yeah, I think it needs to be told clearly what people can do and what makes sense. Otherwise, I agree that people would be just stuck in this powerlessness that in many people can lead to strong negative reactions. And how to overcome this bubbleness of information, it's a difficult question. I think school programs should include more information, not only about the threats of climate change, but also about how to act upon it on an individual level, so that it makes sense and doesn't lead to frustration, powerlessness, and guilt. So I think it should be institutionalized in some way, but I haven't really thought about that that much.
Great reflections, and then we have Gisle Solbu with a question.
Yeah, thanks for a wonderful presentation. This really triggered my curiosity a lot, and I just want to pick up a bit from this logic of anxiety that Marianne mentioned with Jørgen Randers, and that you should scare people to act, which seem to have some unwanted consequences that we're maybe not discussing enough. If you're approaching the public in this broad way of trying to scare them to do things, and we're creating this global anxiety. So my question is, within your field of psychology, has there been now any discussions that goes towards that we should maybe approach this from a different logic that is more mentally healthy and don't have these kind of bad implications? I know within the field of SDS and research management, there's a lot of discussion now towards this logic of care, or something towards that direction, if that has been discussed in this public communication initiatives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I haven't seen many papers or discussions in psychology journals about communicating about ways of communicating about climate change. It's actually quite a new research topic, how this awareness of global environmental problems influences people psychologically. So I think it's like a new avenue of research, and maybe there will be more insights about it soon. But there is quite some research in the climate or science communication studies, I think, and there were these experimental studies about how different communicates, but also images, how they influence people. But I don't think that there's, or I don't know, I haven't seen much research discussing it in psychology per se.
Okay, thanks.
Great. So that actually brings us to 1 o'clock, and are there anyone who has a burning question in their pocket? They can bring it up, or if you want to say something before we end, Michalina?
No, thank you everyone for participating.